grew up in Long Beach, California. Was an athlete my whole life, played both volleyball and soccer all through high school. Eventually decided I wanted to play volleyball in college. Visited a ton of schools, eventually settled on Duke and spent 4 years there, had a really incredible experience. Graduated in 2013 with degrees in psychology, African and African American studies, as well as a certificate in marketing management. Began working in sports when I graduated and eventually moved to New York to work for Excel Sports, where I've been for the last 5 years, working on our marketing team, mostly with basketball players, a bit in baseball, doing all things marketing, communications, community, for about a dozen NBA basketball players.
Great. I'm Chris Manhertz, current tight end for the Carolina Panthers. Been in the going into my 6th year in the NFL. Born and raised in the Bronx. Went to a small school in Buffalo called Canisius College. Played 4 years of Division I basketball there, and things took a turn probably shortly after I graduated and picked up a helmet and a football and tried the sport of football. So this is my 5th year, going into my 6th year, actually ever playing football. I graduated with my bachelor's in exercise physiology and my master's in sports administration.
Nice. Again, thanks you all for joining and agreeing to being panelists. My first question, all things considered, how are you?
I'm okay. I feel like that's a very difficult question these days. I am in California with family, which has been incredible. I got here about a week before I feel like things kind of really turned upside down. And I've been really blessed. I'm healthy, my family's healthy, to be with family during these times. Some days I feel very energized by this movement, which has been very exciting, but I'm okay is what I go with these days.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback. I'm as good as I could be, given everything that's going on and given the circumstances. And I kind of always look at things from, a more optimistic outlook and just counting the blessings in terms of, there's a lot more things that, a lot of people have things worse, and looking at this situation, I'm just thankful that, my family's safe, my loved ones are safe, and, no one's really, drastically affected by the coronavirus and what's going on right now.
Gotcha. Glad to hear that you all are both in good health and your family as well. As we kind of kick things off, I guess my first question is, what does it mean to each of you to be Black in America?
For me, to be Black in America, I feel like is to be like a walking, talking, laughing, breathing, loving miracle. Like I feel like we joke about, the line that I feel like everyone kind of played out a few years ago of "I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams," but there are a few words that really encompass, the lives we're living right now outside of that. I feel very blessed. I feel Black is 1000% my the number one piece of my identity. But it really means for me to know that my life just in itself is a radical idea. My joy is a radical idea. And just really a blessing to be here and to be thriving, and to have, a strong, happy, healthy family.
Right. And I also, in answering that question, is first thing I think about when you say what it means to be Black is pride. It's something that I'm proud of. It's something that I'm not, ashamed of. It's something that, should be worn with a badge of honor. But obviously we know that that's the good side of things, but obviously how we're perceived as a group sometimes by some people, it's not, it's not so nice, so to speak. So in knowing that, I have to acknowledge, some of the issues that, that's going on right now in the country, as far as, you know, how Black people are perceived, how there's a whole lot of injustices out there that, you know, we're, you know, mainly the victims of. So I kind of have to play both sides, and, you know, it's not all bad to be Black, but I'm also proud of being Black, and whatever that entails and whatever that comes with, I'm proud of who I am.
Gotcha. In each of your responses, you both obviously emphasized the proud factor in being Black, and you also mentioned the perception factor. I was going to ask, what do you think the perception is that you get in your respective spaces? Obviously, Nailah, you working in the sports industry, and then Chris being a professional athlete.
Yeah, I think that really within basketball and within this space on the marketing side, sometimes the perception is that your job is easier being Black, you know, working closely, mostly with Black players in a very Black industry where, you know, Black culture really drives basketball culture, which to me, it's like if your entire life was harder having been Black and you, for the first time, have this tiny advantage, can we really call it easier? So I think sometimes you do deal with that perception. But in general, I love that I work in a place and in a space where being Black is an aid to me, and being able to connect with moms or cousins or partners or whoever it may be. I absolutely love that. And I love that I work in a league, a little bit more so than Chris's league, that is, you know, extremely progressive and listening to its Black players, which I think is amazing. So I, you know, to Chris's point, I feel very proud to be Black when I come to work and when I'm doing my job, for sure.
On the flip side, I think it's a little different being in a space as an athlete in the NFL, and, you know, a majority of the employees, players-wise, that is, it's maybe 65, 70% Black people. So being in an environment where it's kind of in reverse, where the majority of the league and what it encompasses, it kind of makes me feel, you know, it's good going to work and having camaraderie with and seeing people that look like you and share similar interests. But obviously, you know, there's some people that think like you and share similar interests. But the good thing about sports is that I feel like regardless of, you know, race, political views, things like that, every single person in that locker room has a common goal, and that goal is to win. And it's not to undermine everybody's differences, but it's almost kind of a good thing to see that regardless of people's backgrounds, where they're from, how they view the world, certain religions, that we could all come together and share a common goal, which is the win.
Definitely makes sense. My next question is, how often do you think about race, and in what context?
I mean, I think about race every day. Right now, I think about race every hour. It seems like every 10 minutes. And I mean, I consider myself, I'm probably a very overly analytical person. I belittle points. I think through things far more than I should sometimes. So race is something that comes up that I think about in terms of my decision making, in terms of the way I'm perceived in the world, similar to being a woman. But right now, I feel like for the first time in my life, everyone else is thinking about race as often as I'm thinking about race. I think that, you know, these conversations about the Black experience are conversations that I think I have at probably a higher frequency than most people. And so being in a space where everyone's having those right now, and being able to talk to people maybe that I normally wouldn't talk to about race, but now they're ready for that conversation, has been really incredible to me. I think that acknowledging people's Blackness is so important. I'm often very frustrated with that I'm colorblind, you know, idea of thinking that that makes you, you're doing it right by some means. So it's definitely, you know, at the forefront of the way I move, the way I live my life, the way I think, for sure.
Yeah, and times like these, especially right now, I'll say I think about race all the time. I feel like certain instances or circumstances like these, the conversations about race are super amplified. And I think that it's kind of hard to, this is not the first time something like this has happened to, have some people spark conversation. But the last thing I want to happen is for this to be, okay, a 4-week or month or 6-week conversation about race and acknowledging, Black people, and what they go through. And then after that, it just goes away. To me, I feel like it always has to be a continued conversation because that's one of the better ways to at least get an understanding of all perspectives and try to be a part of the solution and not a problem.
And Chris, I was going to get you to elaborate on that. How do you think we can ensure that we continue this conversation and that it's not just a kind of flash in the pan moment and we are making that impact?
Well, all I could say is that we can control what we can control, and it's on other people to be open-minded and just being willing to listen and hear out all perspectives. And this obviously is beyond Black and white. It could be other cultures as well, just trying to understand the Black experience and what that means. And I think a lot of that, those conversations will just take, you have to rely on people to at least want to have that conversation, one, and two, be willing to understand and hear your perspective without undermining your experience because they didn't go through it.
Gotcha. Nailah, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think that acknowledging the experience is such an important step that I feel like we have never, in my lifetime, I've never seen at this magnitude. I think that we grew up and, came of age in this like Obama era or post-Obama era where everyone thought we were going to live in this post-racial society. So coming back to this conversation, I've felt is extremely important and needed. So yeah, I completely agree, Chris.
Great. The next question is, did your parents sit down with you as a kid to talk about race or what to expect growing up Black? I know my parents did, so just curious if you guys' parents had that talk as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important question. And I think that as men, you guys probably have a very maybe different story. I think that, while the Black woman is the most disrespected person in America, the Black man is definitely the most feared. And that's a very important distinction. So for me, I grew up, Black was at the forefront of our household. My brother's name is Khalid Jahi Mandela after Nelson Mandela. My sister is Imani Assata after Assata Shakur, and Imani is the last day of Kwanzaa. So from a young age, like explaining your name to people, we were very aware that we had Black names for important reasons. So I don't remember being like 8, 9 years old or whatever it might be, my parents sitting me down and being like, I need to talk to you about what Black means. Like it was always just a part of our life. But the one story I do remember about learning for the first time, not that I knew that I was Black and I knew it meant something, but the dangers of it. So both of my parents went to Long Beach State, and when they were in school, one of their classmates who was on the football team, his name was Ron Settles, was murdered by the police. And he grew up with my mom about 20 minutes away in a suburb called Carson, and he lived in the same dorm as my dad, so very close to home for both of them. And he left school on a Friday afternoon. He drove the 20 minutes home, or planned to drive the 20 minutes home. And on Saturday morning, he was found beaten and hung in a jail cell in Signal Hill, which is a small city right between Long Beach and Carson. And I remember we have pictures of my parents marching and protesting that. And I always knew Ron Settles' name, but I remember my mom telling me at a young age that Mrs. Settles, Ron's mom, had died of a broken heart not long after that, and knowing that she was a completely healthy woman before that. And I remember like very succinctly learning that you could die of a broken heart, and learning that the police could lie and that everyone knew what happened and it didn't matter, and the police could kill you and nothing could happen to them. So that story, which was just a part of my childhood, a part of, knowing that you could drive from Long Beach State, where my dad worked, to Carson, where my grandparents lived, and something horrible happened to you, was a very like formative story that stuck with me at an early age. So for me, in our household, it was very much through learned experiences. It was at the forefront every day. They didn't take the route of, trying to hide us from our Blackness and then having to reveal it to us at any point in time. It was just, it was talked about in a very matter-of-fact way.
And in my experience, both my parents were immigrants from Jamaica, and I could recall, one or two particular moments, and having I guess a kind of a reminder, especially with all the police brutality and what always has been going on. This isn't anything new, but my dad having to sit down and talk with me of how some people might perceive you, and it's not a matter of just say all people perceive you this way, but there are some people that they just look at things totally wrong. They might look at you because of what you look like, and the tone of your skin is inferior. And in doing that, my parents just kind of encouraged me to, like I opened up this whole conversation, to embrace who I am and be comfortable in who I am, and not to be ashamed of who I am. And that's not to say, as a parent, they said everyone is, different, but no one is inferior or more than or less than, So I think the biggest thing that I took from my parents encouraging me throughout my whole life is be comfortable in who you are, be proud of who you are, and that's enough. It is enough.
Chris, I also think that's a really interesting point and distinction that we don't talk enough about in this country. So I grew up in Southern California, where I feel like 90% of Black people there are African Americans, the descendants of the slaves in America. And then I moved to New York and moved to Harlem, and the diaspora is on full display in Harlem and in the Bronx, where you grew up. So it is a very drastic difference being raised by Jamaican parents who grew up in Jamaica, where everyone looked like them, versus, being raised by, for me, parents who were the children of people who grew up in the Jim Crow South, or the grandchildren or people who grew up, in the Deep South, and what they went through there. So I think that's something that is so nuanced, is how much diversity there is in the Black experience here in America, based on, where your parents were born, where your grandparents were born, and what their lives looked like growing up in terms of their Blackness.
Absolutely.
Definitely agree. I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about our allies. How would each of you define the term ally, especially given our current climate?
Yeah. So for me, an ally is a person who is willing to get in the ring with us and take this on with us. So as a Black person in this country, you don't get to like dance in and out of which cases you follow, which murders of unarmed Black people affect you more than others. Like, you're hit with every single one of them. You can't escape them. Even if you wanted to, like, every group chat you're in is talking about it. That's what your feed looks like. That's what your parents are talking about when you call home. The idea that we can't decide when we want to feel this, and part of white privilege is being able to, go into your safe space and it not affect your life, of whether they arrest the police officers who murdered Breonna Taylor or not. So really making a conscious effort to take that on, and to say, all right, I'm going to be in it. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to follow the cases. I'm going to watch the videos. I'm going to attempt to witness and see what you feel and what your life looks like. I'm going to do the work on my end to put myself in the ring with you.
Right, and to piggyback on what you're saying, I would simply define an ally as anyone that sees that there's a problem and is trying to be a part of the solution. There's a lot of people that might try to understand, and I honestly don't expect especially a white person, to know what it feels like to be Black. I don't expect them to. I can't expect them to try to understand and try to educate themselves and try to hold their peers accountable if they hear something or see something that's out of line and adding to the problem. So that's how I would define a ally.
Just curious, have either of you had any friends from your past, whether it's like high school teammates or friends growing up through elementary, that have reached out to you and just simply say, hey, I'm not sure what to say, but I'm here for you. I stand for you. I support. Like I've had a few people hit me up that I haven't heard from in years, and they're just like, man, with all this craziness going on, just wanted to know that I fully support you and I'm here for you if you need anything.
All right, a whole lot.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I've had a ton, and it's been beautiful. And even the texts that say, I don't know what to say, but I see you, have been incredibly moving. And I'm not shocked by it. I grew up with a lot of white women and people of color who aren't Black, and they have always been, you know, they grew up around my parents and in my house. So they heard the stories, they were in it, they weren't shielded from it. I didn't speak differently around them. So they know who I am, they know the life I live, they know what I care about. And I feel very blessed to hear from them, because at the end of the day, what I always say is that, like, we can only push this movement so far. I can put up whatever I want to put up on my feed and say all of these things, and anyone who is following Nailah is already in the ring with me. No one is signing up to look at my content who is super far on the other end, right? I don't have any racist cousins or uncles at Thanksgiving dinner. It's just not what your life looks like as a Black woman. So we need allies. Allies are a huge part of this movement. They are who pushes this forward. So I'm here for it. I'm here for all forms of allyship, for sure.
Absolutely. And I can't even, I've had many conversations like with my Black and white counterparts over the past couple weeks. And obviously everybody has like a different, everybody has a different outlook and experience. You know, not all Black people go through the same experiences. So it's kind of interesting to see and hear from people in the Black and white community to see, you know, where the issue is and what could be like tangible solutions. And to your point, it's beyond, you know, posting an all Black picture on social media. It's about doing the work. It's strictly about doing the work, and there's many ways that a lot of people could go through that, whether it be even just simply educating themselves, you know, trying to understand, you know, watching, you know, movies, reading books, or even talking to some friends. Like, there's many ways to go about trying to be a part of the solution. But I know that there's tons of like actionable things that everyone can do to try to help.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's how a good point of how we avoid performative allyship, of putting up the black box and not being the beginning and the end of what you do. So I think that's a great point.
Definitely. And you kind of alluded to it in your last response, but I was going to ask, what would be your advice to an ally that simply does not know what to say or do during these times?
Yeah, I'd say two things. I'd say first, exactly what Chris said, do the work. So while the conversations with the Black people in your life are extremely important, it's not Black people's responsibility to teach white people about racism. It's just not. All of the resources are out there. So, find the books, find the podcasts, find the documentaries, learn about it, and then come to me and we can talk about it. We can talk about what my experience is like or how I interpret different things. But it's not my responsibility to teach you about the 13th Amendment, to teach you about the fugitive slave law. Like, I learned it, you can learn it as well. So that's half of it, and, being a great ally. And the other half of it, as I would say, is, as a white person who has this privilege and who has a head start, what are you willing to give up in the name of equality? Because what I don't think is fair is for us to be asking Black people to give things up right now in the name of equality. And the best example I've seen of that is Kyle Korver, who I think is an incredible white ally in the NBA, was doing an interview with a client of mine, Richard Jefferson. And Richard asked him, if you get to vote on whether we play or we don't play, we go to the bubble or we don't go to the bubble, what's your vote? And Kyle really quickly and very beautifully said, you know, I am here for this movement. I stand with my brothers. I support anything that the best way they decide that we should push this forward. But I would not feel comfortable voting because it's not my fight. It's their fight and they can make the decision and I'll stand with them. And to me, this is a guy who's at the end of his NBA career, who has never won an NBA championship, and has a real chance to win one this year with Milwaukee, who is willing to give that up in the name of this movement, which I think is incredible. So both of those things, doing the work on your own and then really thinking about what you're willing to give up in the name of equality.
Right, and I think you said everything perfectly, and I'll just emphasize just the education aspect, because there's a lot of things that we obviously know there's a lot of things that are brushed under the rug at school. There's a lot of things that I even learned about Black history that was, you know, well past my schooling years. So having the resource, it's Google University and YouTube University, I call it. And there's a tremendous amount of resources out there for you to learn, just like anything else, you know, and it's just a matter of you just wanting to do it. If you want to learn it bad enough, and if you really want to be a part of the solution, start by learning, and start by trying to, in learning that, it kind of opens your mind to understanding, like, okay, I could understand why, you know, some people think this way, or why some Black people feel this way in general. And I think that just opens up, you know, a means of good dialogue once you're educated.
Gotcha. And obviously you all coming from sport backgrounds, Nailah playing volleyball at UNC. Is it UNC?
Stop.
Okay, at Duke. And then Chris obviously playing collegiate basketball and then professionally for the Panthers. What has sports taught you about race in America?
For me, sports has taught me this, like, America's incredible capacity to compartmentalize how we feel about Black people. I grew up somewhere where, you know, anyone who was like insanely racist had spent no time around Black people. That wasn't a part of their life. Whereas, you know, going to school in North Carolina, I started to see that in the Deep South, you would see these racist people who had, you know, Black people that took care of their children, or Black people that taught their children. And they thought that those Black people were great, but the idea of Black people in general, they had no interest in. So America's ability to pick and choose Black people and pick and choose pieces of Blackness while completely denouncing it, as, you know, an idea and as an institution and as a group in general. And our, you know, just the idea that we absolutely love LeBron James, or we love Steph Curry until they say something about being Black. And then it's all of a sudden they're ungrateful and, you know, go take your millions of dollars and sit down because, you know, you should just be happy what we've given you because we've given it to you. You haven't earned it. Is to me is the tone behind all of that. So in general, I think I grew up with more of an idea that racism, like, racists were all racist and they hated all Black people, and that was absolutely it. But the idea that, you know, you can be fully racist and have a LeBron James poster in your home was something that sports taught me for sure.
And I think you touched on a good point. Like, having money doesn't absolve you from, you know, from people looking at you in terms of being Black. You know, because I could be a random, you know, 6'5", 260-pound person, whether I'm retired or not, and I could get pulled over, and a cop doesn't know anything. They just see who you are, a big Black guy that's, you know, could be a potential threat. So I think you touched on a good point in saying that, like, no matter who you are, how much money you have, what your socioeconomic status is, you're still Black. You know, it doesn't make you less or any more. So that was a great point.
And I think, Chris, for you, especially as a football player, like, you know, people know what Chris Middleton looks like and Giannis looks like. People know what these guys look like. But, you know, wearing helmets, you guys being, you know, the biggest athletes physically, like, completely agree. I think that, the fact that you're an NFL football player does not make you seem any less dangerous and, in any setting.
Right.
And to kind of stay on the topic of sports, what are some changes you would like to see in regards to social justice in sports or athletes using their platform?
For me, I would just like to see that we allow athletes to be more than just athletes. I think we started to touch on this in our last statement, but I think that athletes are kind of the only people in the world, and I think that's directly tied to the fact that they're majority Black here in America, who we decide can't do anything but dribble or catch a football, or anything in that space. Like, we elected effectively a reality television star and acted like how incredible, he's doing this new thing, he's reinvented himself, and it was amazing that a reality TV star, a real estate mogul, if you want to call him that, could take on this new lane. But the second a football player or a basketball player or a Black NASCAR driver decides that he wants to be more than that, or not even more than that, but not that primarily, we decide that they're ungrateful, or we decide that there's no world and that their voice matters, which I find to me is all rooted in their Blackness, 1,000%. It's not rooted in the fact that you play football. It's rooted in the fact that you're Black, and we're masking the fact that you play football. So I would just like to see that completely out the window. There's no reason that any athlete cannot be as qualified to speak on these issues as anyone else.
Right. I think it's just a matter of consistency with how people might pick and choose when it's appropriate to take in what an athlete says as, something that's beyond their sport. I think when it comes to things of this nature, it does make a lot of people uncomfortable, and it does end up in, stick to your sport or whatever. And I'm always a big proponent of, like, being an athlete. It's what I do for right now. It's not who I am. We opened up this conversation with saying who we were, who you were before you were in the space you're in, who I am, where I'm from, the degrees you have, the experience. It's all spans beyond that. And I think it's just very important for, people to accept the fact that it's going to be beyond sports, because at some point I'm going to be a former NFL player. And to be honest with you, I don't want to be labeled as a former NFL player when I'm done. I want to be labeled as whatever I'm doing at that time. Just like, I'm a former basketball. I don't play basketball anymore. That was a part of my life. And, as you move forward and you gain new passions, that should be something that you embrace, and other people should embrace as well.
I definitely agree. And Nailah, I was going to ask, you had mentioned the more than an athlete. Obviously, that's a pretty big tagline these days. Working in the marketing space, how do you work with your clients to make sure that they are viewed as more than an athlete or a basketball or a baseball player?
Yeah. I think something that's really big there, just logistically, is the stories we're letting be told about them. So on the communication side, we have a really big communications team at Excel Sports that I work with closely. And we always have a goal of what we say to them is getting them off the sports pages. We don't want them talking about basketball every chance they get. It's going to be a very comprehensive piece, or unless it's media that they have to do. Everyone knows you're a basketball player. Unless we're trying to tell a specific story about your basketball career, what else can we tell about you? So just humanizing them in general. And then the other half of it is, I think on the community side, a lot of athletes who are doing great community work struggle with not wanting to feel self-serving and promoting that work. But what I always try to tell them is that, while you might not want to tweet that you went to the local food bank, while you might think that that's self-serving to do that, all of your followers now know that local food bank exists when you do that. Like, the PR that athletes can give some of these nonprofits is really incredibly valuable, and that's really what matters. So trying to amplify everything they're doing besides playing basketball, besides playing baseball, besides playing football, because everyone's going to see that. ESPN is going to do their job, If you do something incredible on the court, I promise you everyone will know about it. But what else can we talk about you?
Chris, did you have anything to add on that?
No, she's killing it.
Cool. Last question before we kind of take some from the audience. I was going to ask, how have you all been able to kind of cope with everything that's going on, whether it's the news stories with the social injustice or the pandemic and wearing your mask and washing your hands and social distancing? Like, how are you all coping with all of everything?
Yeah, I definitely take breaks. I'm really excited. I've been with my sister for the last 6 weeks. We're only a year and a half apart. We're very close. So some nights on Friday night at 9 p.m., we put down the social justice warrior hat for a few hours and just play games and have sister time and try to compartmentalize a bit. And then the other thing is I just really try. I feel so energized by this movement. It's I think the biggest movement we've seen in our lifetime, and I've just been so terrified that it's going to end, that I focus on that. And it's just such a blessing that everyone is listening and just feel very like trying to put plans together. What can we do? Like trying to push every single corner of my life forward, whether that's what we're doing at Excel or what Duke Volleyball is doing or what, the club volleyball team that I coach at in New York City is doing. Just really trying to like dive in and take advantage of the moment and know that this moment will not be forever. And I'll feel good on the other side of it if I took advantage of every, ear that would listen.
From a mental health standpoint, like I'm sure we could all understand how like mentally debilitating constantly seeing these things happen. And to your point, it's very important to take breaks, whether it be social media, whether it be from the news. I personally meditate a lot, and it's a weekly practice of mine. So that has helped tremendously, just getting detached away from, I guess the problems and the new norms of what life might bring. But I think definitely take, if you can't handle it, and if I would encourage people, if it gets you overwhelmed, because it's a very triggering topic, and sometimes you have to give yourself a break for just your own sanity. So I meditate a lot. I close the computer, I delete the apps, I leave the TV off, and just spend time with the people I love, and try to get my mind off of whatever it is that's current at the time.
Gotcha. That's cool. Definitely need to look into that. So I see that we have a question from one of our audience members. How can I be an ally and converse with my white friends who need to be enlightened and educated?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The tools are so important of how you have these conversations, and I've started to see them on social media. The good thing I'll say to you is that the other side of this, super far conservatives, have the same kind of 6 talking points that you can very logistically learn to debunk, because they can be debunked. So I think that is really important. And then I think like you have to get past the mental headspace of it being like rude to confront someone. We've all been tricked into thinking that it's more offensive to call someone a racist than to actually be a racist, which is something that you have to like overcome. Like in America, it feels like the worst thing you could do is make someone feel racist rather than actually be racist. So I think, getting past that mental roadblock of this isn't rude to have this conversation. And then I think once you kind of go for it for the first time, it'll probably feel a lot easier. But just take that on as a responsibility, because I would love more opportunities to take those people on. I just don't get them because they're not in my life. But really just feel as it's a responsibility that you have an opportunity to have this conversation, maybe try to change someone's mind, maybe try to change someone's heart. And good allyship is making sure you stand up in those moments.
Right, and just make sure that you just come from a place of openness. And I know, especially topics like these, some people are going to have different outlooks, and it's okay. Part of trying to understand and get towards a solution is hearing each other out. As simple as hearing each other out. I've had conversations in the past where, there's some people that I just can't really have a conversation with because, you know, they get offended or they're just not allowing you to speak and hear your piece. So just come from a place of openness on both sides, because obviously sometimes there's two different viewpoints. And it's not a matter of I'm trying to take somebody's personal experiences away from them, whether it be black or white, but it's just coming from a place of just, all right, let me try to understand, let me bite my tongue for 5 minutes and just try to understand and process where this person is coming from and have a, just a well-rounded conversation without, no one getting up in arms. It's hard, but it's a practice that I tend to do, just trying to understand, why you think this way. I understand that you think this way, but I just want to know why.
Chris, that's very impressive. I'm not very good at that.
I know.
I need to get better at that.
Next question is, what are your thoughts on athletes taking a stance by using their platform to combat social justice?
I think it's great. I mean, I was raised in a way that I think to think that it's a responsibility that, there's white privilege, but there's also all different kinds of privilege. Like, I was very privileged to have parents that went to college and could navigate the public school system in Southern California. And that there's no world in which I ended up at Duke without my parents manipulating the public school system in Long Beach, California. And I know that privilege exists. So for me, there are a lot of athletes who do have privilege to be able to do so. Now, I said this earlier, I don't think it's fair for us to ask Black people to give something up. Like, I think in the bubble, I don't think we have to tell guys, you have to sit down and give up this money, this one chance you have, to make this amount of money in this year. It's not their responsibility to give things up right now. I think it's white people's responsibility to give things up who've had this head start. But I do think the responsibility can lie in using your platform, and whether that's to, if you're lending your platform to an expert so they can talk to your followers, or if it's, making sure people are educated where you live about when you can vote and where you can vote, and supporting candidates that, believe in Black causes. I think that athletes have an insane reach right now. And they are the voices mostly of the Black community. And I think it's really powerful when they choose to use them, for sure.
And I'll say this as like a current athlete. I'll say that it's a lot easier right now to have a voice about this issue than it was before, because there's a lot of corporate brands, the NFL, different sponsors, for what it's worth, that's backing and supporting the cause. Time will tell, in my opinion, if they mean what they say. I'm more of a action person, and but now more than ever, it's a lot easier for us as players to use our platforms and reach people and have an opinion and speak without feeling like you're jeopardizing your situation as much as it was before. And I think it's a good thing in knowing that the NFL and a lot of NFL teams are behind this. So it makes it a lot easier for us to really use our platforms and really speak our minds.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now is the time. I feel like you got to take any opportunity you can. If Angela Davis is saying now is the time, I'm going to believe her. Like, right now, I don't know that we're going to have more momentum than we do today.
Okay. I think we're going to do just one or two more questions. So the next one, as a Black person, do you think it is important to educate yourself in the readings so that you understand what non-Black people are learning? And part B, is it important to have a hive or a group of friends so that you feel safe to be open with and discuss things that are happening and how they're feeling, and if there's any pushback?
That's a long one.
Yeah, I feel like this is the anyone's been following the J. Cole versus No Name debate right now, and is it our responsibility to read these things? You know, that's a good question. I don't know that it's your responsibility to know what the other side is reading, and to be able to, you know, I guess get in the ring with them, I would say. But I do think that it helps. I mean, when I watched 13th for the first time, I feel like they were putting statistics and facts to everything our grandparents had been telling us, that they maybe didn't have the statistics, but they knew all of these things were happening. They knew crack and cocaine were being treated differently. Like, they were living it, so they knew it, so they didn't really need to study it. So I think that just being a Black person in America, you have a wealth of knowledge in this subject already, but I do think it's empowering. And I do think it is, for me, it's like calming to do the work and read the information and be able to put words to the things you know exist and being able to articulate it to others. So I would say it's helpful. It's very, very helpful. But I'm not going to force it on anyone, because No Name tried to do that and it didn't go well for her, apparently.
Right. And it's kind of interesting to hear that, because in having these conversations with people, and to your point, we have a wealth of knowledge, traditionally much more than, you know, white people have about our history. It is our history. So I assume to take that hand in knowing that, you know, by nature, I and my experiences, I know a little bit more just based on experience alone. But as far as, you know, understanding, you know, where non-Black people are learning, I might have to add that a lot of these things, or a lot of people's viewpoints, are based on like their experiences. And some of it is taught, some of it was learned, and they're conditioned to believe something based on what their parents, their grandparents might say. So, and that's not an excuse for them to, you know, be thinking differently or undermining our experiences. But I have to go back again and say, well, I assume that if somebody knows better, they would do better. And I don't want to live my life expecting people to know everything about Black history. So they have to do some research themselves and try to educate themselves, and then having conversations with their Black counterparts, just try to understand. But I honestly think a lot of it is up to that person to just want to unlearn certain things that they were taught, or the way they view things, and try to be a part of the solution.
Great response. Last question. What resources, whether it's literature or media, that do you subscribe to stay kind of culturally aware of what's going on, that you would recommend to either an ally or a person of color?
So I'm a big Twitter person. So I'm following, you know, I feel like main voices in this space, and I feel like they put out a lot of the resources. What I will say is the most powerful piece of content I've consumed since May 25th, which is when George Floyd was murdered and Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper had their encounter in Central Park and this all exploded, was the video posted by Kimberly Jones, who was the Black woman who made the analogy to Monopoly, and Black people, and playing the game of Monopoly, and Greenwood and Tulsa. And I posted it a million times. I begged people to watch it. It was, for me, the most powerful 8-minute video I've seen in my life. So I would suggest everyone go find that if they haven't seen it. But I'm big on choosing the people to follow on social media, and, you know, trusting what they're reading and reading those things, reading those resources.
I agree. And the internet is a very powerful resource. Now, I guess it's on us to filter what we follow, and making sure that the information is accurate, because as we know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So it's kind of hard to really take things in without, you know, doing more research and doing your due diligence, because it's a lot. It is a lot of information out there. But again, I think it just spans down to you really doing the digging. And, you know, Google is an incredible resource. You know, Netflix is, you know, on a tier right now with movies and documentaries about Black history. You know, so that's a good thing. You know, a lot of people could take advantage of that and, you know, play and just, you know, come from a place of understanding.
And as we kind of wrap up, just wanted to say thanks again to everyone for joining the second studio session hosted by the Lab Community, which is a platform designed for athlete development or professionals looking to collaborate, network, and grow. If you haven't already, please join our Slack group at thelabcommunity.com. Wanted to leave the last seconds or so for Nailah and Chris to share any wisdom or thoughts as we wrap it up.
I would just say, like, if everyone can do their part in continuing to push this movement forward, I think the sooner we get back to business as usual, the sooner this whole thing ends. And with NBA basketball coming back, I'm a bit terrified that, you know, we're all going to be talking about whether LeBron James had a good night's sleep or not, rather than arresting people who murdered Breonna Taylor. So to just try to stay in it and keep the things trending. And, you know, people should live their life. They should watch basketball. They should enjoy their lives, but they should continue to think about like what matters in the context of this world.
Right, and don't get distracted. To your point, I know it's hard. It'll be a little bit harder once everything starts back up, whenever that happens. But just making a conscious effort to keep it going, because as we all know, this is not the first time that something like this has happened. Now, I could say in my lifetime to this magnitude, as far as witnessing a movement, so to speak, I've never seen anything like this before. But as far as injustices, like that's an unfortunate conditioning for us to see. And, you know, sometimes, to be honest with you, you see so much of it and here you just become numb. And I don't want it to become a point where people are just numb to things. I want it to be a point of emphasis and calling out like things are not right, and acknowledging like things are not right, and trying to be a part of the solution, whether it be educating yourself, educating others, so that you could, you know, prepare yourself to have a, you know, good conversation and hearing, you know, both points of views.
Gotcha. Definitely appreciate that. And again, just wanted to say thank you for joining, and hopefully you'll continue to stay safe and be well.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
No problem.